Good afternoon, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, professors, friends. This is the final roundtable of this very rich day on the future and the present state of EU-Korea relations. And as you all know, and as we have been discussing this day, the conclusion of the framework agreement and the free trade agreement have enabled the European Union and the Republic of Korea to upgrade their relationship into a full strategic partnership. And since Korea-EU's trade and FDI keep on increasing, the EU-Korea FTA appears to be a great success so far. Cooperation targets between the EU and Korea go beyond free trade and trade relations. There's a clear willingness to collaborate on a larger range of issues such as human rights, non-proliferation, environmental issues, cooperation in multilateral fora. The importance lies in an intensive cooperation on issues that are of interest to both partners. And the purpose of this roundtable is to grasp the overarching nature of the EU-Korea relationship and to inquire into the degree to which the EU and Korea can cooperate further, both bilaterally and multilaterally, to address main challenges facing Europe, Korea, and the international community. As I don't need to tell you, the world is changing very, very quickly. Contemporary international affairs are characterized by an increased polarization process, changes in all kinds of equilibria in the world, and the appearance of new actors and constellations of power. And in this context, of course, Asia is becoming the main powerhouse in the world. In contrast with our European integration process, though, Asian regionalism remains rather loose-knit and lacks a strong record of institutionalization, like what we have done in the past 50, 60 years. The last few years have nevertheless shown that many initiatives have been proposed to enhance the collaboration between states in Asia as well. And in this context, it is important to remember that Korea shares a large range of values with the European Union and is a primary partner of the EU in the region. And it is therefore very useful to analyze the role and possible function of the EU-Korea partnership in that Asian context. We are very honored to welcome to this panel 4 very distinguished experts from Korea, from the EU, and from the academic community. Each of the distinguished members of the panel will make a brief opening statement. Afterwards, we will open the discussion and engage with questions from you. I have to say that we target to close down, finalize this whole conference by more or less 5:30 in order to enable us to do a quiet walk in the direction of the Berlaymont building, where you know that there will be from 6 o'clock onwards a reception offered to all of us. Let me briefly introduce the speakers now. Professor François Godement is Director for Strategy of the Asia Center and Professor of Political Science at Sciences Po in Paris. He has, of course, a unique record on this field of expertise, and I don't think I need to restate his many impressive publications in this area. We have then Mr. Herbert Reul, who is the member of the European Parliament. He is a member of the Bureau of the European People's Party and deputy chairman of the group of members from NRV in the European Parliament. Mr. Reul is also chairman of the Delegation for Relations with the Korean Peninsula at the Parliament. Next, we have His Excellency Mr. Chang Bom Kim, who is Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary to Belgium and the European Union, to the European Union since 2012. I don't need to restate his long-standing and very distinguished diplomatic career. And then we have, of course, with us also His Excellency Mr. Viorel Istijoa Budura, who is the Managing Director for Asia and the Pacific of the European External Action Service, who also has a long distinguished state of service in diplomacy. with those very distinguished panel members, I think we have an excellent crew for us. And I would like to ask, first of all, to Professor Gaudemont to give us a kind of brief tour d'horizon, to say it in French. Thank you very much.
Push this first. Thank you very much, Chairman, for these kind words. And thank you, of course, to the Leuven Center for Global Governance Studies for the invitation and the chance to talk in front of you. I feel that much has been said during the day, and in particular, for example, at the workshop I attended in the afternoon. So I have a duty to try and go beyond. And that is not easy, because when we're talking about EU-Korea relations, we may be obsessed, mesmerized with the short-term view, and the short-term view is, of course, what's happening on the side of North Korea, the repeated issues that come from North Korea. And then we tend to look at a much larger, much wider, much brighter future, which is that there should be a natural fit for relations between the Korean Peninsula in general and Europe for a number of reasons I'm going to try to stretch out. Yet these relations are not always at the level that they should be, or even when they exist, the political consciousness for them is not necessarily completely there. Let me start, however, by stating that the issue of the FTA, what has happened over the past few years, the fact that Korea has been able to place the decisive push and make the necessary concessions for the FTA to happen with Europe, and what has been happening since the FTA is in place. Of course, it's easier for us Europeans to say that because with the economic climate in Europe, we are the first beneficiaries chronologically of the free trade agreement, and we have to presume that Korea will be ultimately a very strong beneficiary too, but in the first phase, the conjuncture has decided in that way. But that it shows that the two countries, the Korea as a country and Europe as a group of nations, could go beyond many obstacles and chart a way for the future and take decisive steps towards that future. There are, however, obstacles, and the obstacles I think we have to restate. Korea, whether north or south, has been hemmed in for 1.5 centuries in a region of big powers with big power management and with sphere of influence thinking, which has never completely disappeared from the region, tends to reappear. The Koreans call themselves a shrimp among whales, and now, of course, it's a very big shrimp. And some of the whales are getting smaller. But that is, of course, the Korean mentality. You could only compare it to the situation in Central Europe or the Balkan 60 years ago. And of course, we Europeans have a very strong experience of this sphere of influence and balancing and hedging and in diplomatic relations. But the thing is, the European Union is an experiment that has succeeded in superseding that era, in moving to a different era. Korea, south or north, in fact, I would venture to say, is partly stuck by the circumstances, by the environment in that era, and we have to take that into account. This is important because Europe is not significant today as a hard power in East Asia, whereas the US is, Japan is, China is, considerably. Russia was and could be again. We do not come equipped with the tools, so to speak, to move with the hard power issues in Northeast Asia, which creates for us the temptations to be otherwise creative or to try to go beyond this environment, but it's not always possible, and we have to be very careful when we do it, which creates for Koreans, north and south, the temptation to treat Europe as a useful complement, as something that is different from their usual environment. I heard in a previous session that the North Koreans, in fact, had friendship for Europe because what they received for Europe, I would say that is true, but one might add it's also a partner that's not strong enough to impose really conditions on Europe, on North Korea beyond the sanctions, and that therefore the North Koreans always think that it might prove to be an easier partner to deal with than the others. So friendship is probably tinged with the notion that you might get more from Europeans than from others. For South Korea, even though South Korea has become a global power thanks to its multinational firms, thanks to the extended range it has in different fields, even though it wants to think global very clearly. That has been the motto of several succeeding presidents, and I think it will remain so with President Park when she comes in. But South Korea does not have the kind of footing in Europe that either China or Japan have. China has an army, so to speak, of Chinese immigrants, of contacts on the ground, and Japan has a long history of cultural exchange and MNCs which are deeply entrenched. It has a history of relations with countries like the UK. It is more difficult for Korea, which therefore tends to deal with us either as a regional power with requests for itself or as a global economy power, something that goes in fact beyond the European Union, that's in the economic sphere. Witness the true engagement that Korea has been able to give to its G20 co-presidency, for example. And some of us, I remembered, were skeptical at the time because even the Koreans were not completely daring enough in their propositions. But now that we see what's happening after them, we regret, of course, the Korean presidency, co-presidency of the G20. So this is clearly a forward-looking country. The problem with Europeans is how to deal with it and how to deal with it realistically. Let me start by North Korea, since it's the problem of the day, and it's the problem of the decade perhaps, but it's certainly the problem of the day. It's the hardest problem in the world for diplomats. There are no rewards, only penalties for dealing with North Korea. And Americans know fully well they have to get their act together, they have to line up, they have to be fully unitary in the way they act. And this, with a small country, a small partner, what remains in theory a small problem, only regional if there wasn't the proliferation factor. It's even harder for Europe. And one problem I see is that we discuss policies, we discuss a range of policies. Currently, of course, it's going to be in between reinforced sanctions and acceding or agreeing to increased deterrence of the North, or on the contrary, further engagement. But the problem is not so much the choice between those two solutions. Almost every policy on North Korea has failed, whether it's sanctions or whether it's engagement. It's how and when you apply it. And that has often been a problem with European action. I personally still regret that at the time that we undertook recognition for most of us, most European countries recognized North Korea, even if it's true that not all are represented actually in Pyongyang. That was done as a kind of unilateral, voluntary gesture without some kind of deal. We had the illusion that if we gave more, we would get more, and that was probably an illusion. The DPRK currently is in a strange situation because I think it has reached its historic goals. It's a nuclear power, and it's getting to be a ballistic power, and it is on the way to reinstating the deterrent that it lost sometimes in the 70s. It is extremely important for the defense of the regime. The problem is they have no goal beyond that. They have no view of the future. They have no regional view apart continuing to balance. We now know that they are not dependent or completely hostage of the People's Republic of China, however deep the interdependence. They need a policy beyond achieving this goal, and that is going to create problems for them. We cannot hope to achieve our goals through a policy that's solely dealing with proliferation, solely dealing with the nuclear imperative, because unfortunately we now understand that the solution of this problem will come last, not first. I believe that the North Koreans are after a guarantee for not only the state, but the regime. We cannot give a guarantee for the regime, but we might give an effective guarantee to the state. That is important. It runs contrary to the goal of reunification, which is a stated goal for North and South, but that's the reality. I think Europeans, particularly those who are members of the Security Council, Russia, which is, I have heard, cited on the side of China, but Russia is never fully on the side of China. For example, Russia could have high hopes of direct relations through the Korean Peninsula with the South, gas, train, rail. These countries should serve as a kind of guarantor for a future status of North Korea. I don't think it matters so much if we look at the six-party talk. The six-party talk are the envelope that is invoked when things start up, but the solutions are not reached through the six-party talks so fast. They are just a sign that something is happening. So I, of course, would not be opposed. I would be delighted if Europe took part, but I don't think that would change the form of the six-party talk, which is purely circumstantial. I think the situation now requires more inventivity, more creativity to solve the North Korean problem. And as much as we dislike the regime, as much as we dislike particularly its human rights record, we now need to find novel solutions to get out of the trap that we're in. That, I think, is very important. On the side of relations with the ROK, I cannot disassociate it personally, apart, of course, from sectoral cooperation, which is hugely useful given the advanced technology and the advanced social technology that the ROK has in different areas. But I cannot separate it from the goal of regionalization and regional institutions. I think we have a duty, for example, as Europeans, to outline to our Korean friends and to others in East Asia over maritime issues, over issues of compromise on territorial issues, over issues involving history, for example. We have a duty to outline how we modestly, after much bloodshed, after many problems, have found solutions, how we can help to transfer them, how we can modestly hope that some of these experiences are useful. I think it is important in that sense that the EU, and not only the member states, show itself as an active partner that is pushing for regional institutions and region building. That is perhaps one of the biggest contributions that we can make at this point for the region. It would be very important to help foster in South Korea, which is now an advanced society, an advanced economy on the technological frontier, to begin fostering in Korea what I would call the pride of contributing to global norms. It strikes me that in several areas, South Koreans industrialists and scientists do actually infinitely better than where their country is at in terms of international norms, whether you talk about environment or a number of similar issues. South Korea actually underplays its advanced status when it could be a model. That has very long been a Japanese, how should I say, not exactly a Japanese monopoly, but a Japanese niche in the region. And Korea is acquiring it, in fact, through its firms, through its technology, but it's not playing it fully at the level of international norms. That would be very useful. We are locked currently in a situation where only the EU and Japan probably keep pushing for these norms, which are not widely accepted, particularly by emerging economies. So I would plead for a new stage of development for EU-Korea relations beyond the FTA that makes Korea a promoter of global norms. This is in fact what they started to do within the G20 on financial issues, without doubt. So it's not as if they hadn't started on that road, but it could be pushed. And that, I think, would justify much attention on the part of Europeans. That is about what I want to say. I realize that there are missing grounds, missing parts in what I've said about the future of EU-Korea relations. Singularly, I would mention education and the promotion of exchanges, which are still not developed enough, and which would justify a very strong push. I think our youth, on the average, don't know Korea as well as they know some other Asian cultures, and that there should be a policy to encourage the developments in those areas. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much, Professor Godement, for this excellent tour d'horizon. You have pointed us to a number of very interesting challenges, and I hope we can come back to that during the discussions. It's now my pleasure to give the floor to our member of the European Parliament, Herbert Reul.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I want to thank you for the invitation to say a few words in this roundtable. Korea and the EU look back on 50 years of diplomatic relations this year. Remarkable achievement, especially in the last years. Our cooperation has intensified. We have never worked as closely together before as we do today. The parliamentary elections in Korea in April last year and the elections of the Blue House in December last year set a cornerstone for the development of the country for the next years. This, of course, also influenced the future cooperation between the EU and Korea. In January of this year, as 2030, the Korean delegation in the European Parliament has welcomed 4 members of the Korean Assembly during the 16th Inter-Parliamentary meeting. We exchanged views on current issues. This meeting was characterized by a vivid dialogue, which showed that we have a lot of topics which are of importance for both the EU and Korea. We have an open and constructive debate which showed that we discovered a lot of common positions and similar views, and also some things we discussed, very intensive. I'm very much looking forward to exchanging views again with the new government of the Republic of Korea when the Korean delegation is traveling in Seoul in July this year. After the Treaty of Lisbon came into force in December 2009, the European Parliament first time had the chance to vote on a free trade agreement in 2010. This was the FTA between Korea and the European Union. Now that the FTA is in place for more than 1.5 years, we can draw a careful but positive balance. I only speak for the European Parliament, but from our side, we are very satisfied with the process so far. The FTA increased the volume of trade between both parties to 100 billion euro. According to the EU Commission, the EU industry and EU agriculture exporters save 1.7 billion euro, Korean exporters 1.1 billion euro. With the FTA, new trade opportunities open up amounting to 19.1 billion euro for the EU and 12.8 billion euro for Korea. But putting aside the numbers, definitely one of the most important impacts of the FTA is that it was able to absorb a great downturn of trade between both counterparts. Even though it is too early to draw final conclusions on the implications of the agreement, we can be optimistic. Economists predict that 5 years after the agreement was taken into force, 97% of industrial custom duties will be eliminated. After 7 years, we will practically have a freedom of trade. It is often said that the free trade agreement between the EU and Korea served as the best practice example for other FTAs that followed. This shows how well negotiated this agreement was and how successful it was put into force. I'm also confident that the agreement will also be carefully examined when it comes to the negotiation for the future EU-US free trade agreement. Anyhow, not only the Parliament will follow the development of economic relations and the impact of the FTA to the EU and the Republic of Korea with great interest. Personally, I'm very optimistic in this regard. But trade is not the only topic on the EU and Korea are concerned with. We also share severe problems. As you all know, there has been a lot of turmoil in the East Asian realm recently. The role Kim Jong-un is playing in this region does not only worry the Republic of Korea, China, Japan, and the US, it concerns the entire world. Not long ago, the international community, including myself, we hoping that the new leader might prove a modernizer. From time to time, we received surprisingly open messages from this regime. A couple of weeks ago, the North Korean regime welcomed Eric Schmidt, the chief executive of Google. With hosting the American delegation in Pyongyang, Mr. Kim showed his openness towards a more liberal approach. Unfortunately, he proved us wrong. Beginning that last week, North Korea undertook a third nuclear test in the same underground complex after the ones in 2006 and 2009. These kinds of actions do not foster peace and stability in the region, on the contrary. To be honest, I'm quite pessimistic on the issue of nuclear weapons. I do not see that Mr. Kim will ever give up his nuclear weapons because he believes they is his only claim to influence nationally and internationally. In my opinion, it is almost impossible for the international community to convince Pyongyang to give up its nuclear weapons. I support the agreement of the European foreign ministers to tighten sanctions against North Korea by prohibiting the purchase of government bonds. But at the same time, I believe that these measures are not very effective. The international community should take a more patient approach towards North Korea. Rushing to judgments on how to respond to the North Korean threats might not be the best or the only solution. I believe that the actions taken by the UN Security Council were not sufficient in the past, and they did not put enough pressure on this regime. Possibly the sanctions not taken by the EU will also not be efficient as to make North Korea seriously rethink its nuclear policy. I'm convinced that China has a special responsibility in this context. A strong positioning by China might have an enormous effect on North Korean policy. An oil embargo by China would be a way more efficient than any other international sanctions. As I already said in the interparliamentary meeting in January this year, for future cooperation between the EU and Korea, I would like to encourage Korean diplomats, politicians, and economists to approach the EU institutions with ideas on how to support South Korea in the dialogue with the North. The Korean Peninsula is not the only big player in this region. Also, other big nations influence regional developments in East Asia. With the changing government in China and a newly elected Prime Minister of Japan, a new era has begun. Old and new geopolitical issues, for example, the island dispute, the North Korea issue, and others are on the agenda. I'm glad that the major regional players are in the dialogue on these topics, and I'm hoping for fruitful discussions and for all parties acceptable solutions in the future. I'm sure the EU can play its part in this discussion and work together with all parties towards regional stability wherever it can. Finally, I once again want to point out that Korea has become an increasingly important international partner in the last year. The EU and Korea both have similar views on a number of topics. Therefore, it is no surprise that we are talking about a strategic partnership between the EU and Korea. Personally, in my role as a chairman of this delegation for the relation with the Korean Peninsula, I will take the opportunity to work on and add values to this strategic partnership. May we find solutions to future problems in the East Asian realm through constructive dialogue and continuous cooperation. And I think this day and these discussions all over the day and also in this afternoon can help us a little bit to find some new ideas and to find things what we can do for this cooperation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Royal, for your very interesting perspective as a member of the European Parliament and chairman of the delegation for the relations with the Korean Peninsula. I think this perspective is extremely enriching for us, and I hope we can also come back and discuss a little bit the broadening of this relationship, not just between governments, not just involving, as Professor Godemont has said, also challenges with regard to education, sensitizing our citizens and students and scholars, also, say, the parliamentarian dimension. It's now my honor to give the floor to Ambassador Changbom Kim to share with us a Korean perspective.
Thank you. Floor, and I think it must have been a very long day for most of the participants, since many of them has attended the whole sessions from very early in the morning. I'm very thankful for all the participants, and also especially my gratitude goes to all the research institutions, think tanks, and universities, and individual participants who have been contributing to the whole discussions that have been happening throughout the whole day. The composition of the think tanks and research institutions and the variety of attendance are already illustrating the bright and better future of the EU-Korea relations that we are now discussing. I'm very proudly presenting to you that the current status of EU-Korea relations, in a nutshell, is in an excellent shape, and it is expanding. It is being enhanced year by year, especially since the conclusion of the framework agreement that was signed in May 2010, and also the implementation of EU-Korea Free Trade Agreement in July 2011. I would like to make my remarks as brief as possible, and hopefully to get over to Berlaymont by 6 o'clock. I will just give you some kind of ideas that I could share with you. Is that I would like to divide it into two dimensions. One is near-term tasks for the future of relations, and the other is mid and longer-term challenges that we could work together on. For near-term tasks, I could just toss up three items. That is, one is how to develop this current relationship into a genuine strategic, literally strategic partnership, which I think is most of the previous speakers throughout the sessions in the morning and in the afternoon have well touched upon. Since Korea is one of the 4 Asian strategic partners, including China, Japan, and India. And another task is how to operationalize the current framework agreement, which covers most of the areas of the bilateral relations. It shows the comprehensive nature of the relationship, and importance has been attached, but how to make it work, from the annual bilateral EU-Korea summit to bilateral political dialogue, trade committee, joint committee, and all the other implementation mechanisms that are supporting the whole institutional framework. And the third task might be related with the smooth and full implementation of EU-Korea Free Trade Agreement. It has been taken into effect in July 2011, so it's a little more than 1 year and a half. It's still a toddler stage, so we should nurture a kid to walk alone on his own foot. So I think it's, we need a bit of special care to be awarded to this still fragile status of the EU-Korea FTA. Those are 3 kind of tasks that we could foresee for the near-term perspective. And then mid and longer-term challenges that we might be faced with is more of opportunities than the challenges, but together with EU, Korea can chart out a new way of addressing these challenges to come. I could cite 4 challenges. One is beyond FTA and create a new engine of growth for both economies. The second one is, as was discussed throughout the whole day, how to promote regional integration in our part of the world, in Northeast Asia. That's more related with promotion of regional multilateralism in Asia as a whole. And thirdly, joint initiatives to tackle global common challenges. That includes, of course, security, crisis management, green growth, environmental protection, ETS, and all sort of things. And lastly, is a bit much longer term perspective, but when we are dealing with North Korea, now I think it's quite high time for us to envision one united Korea, since in the last 50 years, where and when we have established diplomatic relations with EU in the year of 1963, we're still in the middle of very confrontational Cold War. With the collapse of Berlin Wall in the year of 1989, and then we have seen the so-called post-Cold War structures now being more or less institutionalized on every part of the world except on the Korean Peninsula. So while we are looking at the next 50 years or next several decades onward, then we may have to envision a kind of new terrain or new landscape that might be built upon on the Korean Peninsula. That is Korea as a one. So for that, I think we could have some more discussions while we are working together with EU to get more engagement of the European Union in its context with North Korea and the stakeholders vis-à-vis the whole Korean peninsula. And those are the kind of 4 challenges that I just want to present to you. And out of those 4 challenges, I would personally like to emphasize the importance of the regional emerging trend of regional integration in Northeast Asia. Even though we are seeing many kind of contentious issues arising out of the region with political differences, sometimes is being translated into some acrimonious, belligerent exchange of rhetorics. But still, there is one direction that we could at least pay attention to. Also, we should nurture to be fostered, especially with the cooperation of the European Union. As we see the dispute coming to the forefront, it is much clearer that Northeast Asia is required to take its own indigenous regional cooperation process forward. So, as other speakers have indicated, the European process of integration, European project that has been being institutionalized on the European continent might be a good reference points that China, Japan, and Korea can learn from, as well as the ongoing efforts on the part of 3 countries would be shared with the European friends, since Trilateral Cooperation Secretariat is now based and established in Korea about a little less than 2 years ago. And then the interactions and the more structured dialogues among 3 countries are now being coordinated through the Trilateral Cooperation Secretariat, which is a very an embryonic stage, but we never know that in the 1950s and 1960s, the whole institutions that are now we are seeing here in Brussels might not have been imagined in about in the 60s or late 50s. So even though it's a very early stage and very primitive, but this whole structural schemes that are now being implemented among 3 countries, China, Japan, and Korea, would be a very small but brave foothold that East Asia integration process can be built on later on. Once again, thank you so much for all the participants, especially there are some scholars who have come all the way from Jeju Island and Seoul from Korea, and also all the researchers and professors who have been dedicating their very valuable insights and comments on the future of EU-Korea relations. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ambassador, for pointing us to these very important, say, near-term tasks and mid to long-term challenges, in particular the challenge of regional integration. And I know there is no comparison possible whatsoever, but let me simply point us, being a Belgian citizen, that we had also something like an embryonic three-country experiment before the larger European integration process took off, which was the Benelux, and which is still with us today, but which has long been, if you wish, surpassed by the speed and the intensity of the European integration process. Now my pleasure to give the floor to Ambassador Istijau Budura, who will share with us the view from the EEAS.
Thank you, Chair. Let me just recall that Professor Godemont started by saying that much has been said already today. I feel that everything has been said. Well, what remains for me, of course, in my capacity, and if you'll allow me also on a personal note, is to frankly say how privileged I feel to be a member in a panel with eminent representatives of the Parliament, of scholarly circles, and of diplomatic corps here in Brussels. But again, I feel very privileged because I had two unique chances in my career. First, the one to join the diplomatic service of the Union, European External Action Service 2 years ago, shortly, quite briefly after the agreement being reached for having a political and free trade agreement between the Republic of Korea and the European Union, and then shortly being in charge of the implementation of the political agreement and getting involved on a daily basis in this interaction, which now we are trying to look at it into retrospective, and based on that to devise a good, better future for our cooperation. Again, I was very much feeling privileged because something like 13 years ago, in the year 2000, I was sent by my country as diplomatic envoy, ambassador of Romania to Republic of Korea. My country at the time just celebrated 10 years of diplomatic relations with Republic of Korea. And it was a fantastic moment, I have to say, to the same extent a historical one, since I have witnessed in the summer of 2000 the visit of the President of Republic of Korea to Northern Korea, to Pyongyang, the historical shaking hands between leaders of the two Koreas. It was something which always will stay with me, the euphoria, the excitement, which was visible all over the place. On TV, we could see the streets of Pyongyang celebrating peace and good dialogue and cooperation with the South. In Seoul, you could see the people dreaming about reunification and a better future. Unfortunately, you know very much how the region, the context, the historical conditions were not ripe, but this historical moment will stay with us for many decades. To the same extent, it was the moment in which the people, we, the Europeans, felt that if these kind of things as the crumbling of the Berlin Wall is possible here in Europe, some other nations may prove that this might be possible in other regions still facing challenges of national drama, of history still being made in a very difficult way, and the future still waiting for accomplishing national ideals. But again, I feel everything which was said today, from morning till the session this afternoon by the distinguished colleagues in the panel, show how much there is a dream, hope, and real possibilities to do something together. And I recall that by, first of all, mentioning how we value this celebration of 50 years of diplomatic relations. They are coming at a good moment in which we can, in retrospect, know how much the continent here, the Europe, was able to overcome the division. And for this, everything which was said as something we can learn from the European expertise and experience and modestly offer to our Korean friends about historical reconciliation, unification of the continent and of the region, and overcoming the ideological divide, it's something which I'm sure through our dialogue, especially with the friends in the Republic of Korea, it's something which will make possible a better cooperation for the future for the sake of peace stability, not only in the Korean Peninsula, but also in Northeast Asia, in the region in general, in the world. From this point of view, once again, I will recall how much my experience in the department, Asia and Pacific department, in dealing with Korean friends on our bilateral agenda, proved to be very exciting and to the same extent a history in the making, because we had, soon after the agreements reached, the first bilateral meetings in which we tried to devise ways of implementing these agreements, look for new areas of cooperation. What the ambassador, my good friend, has mentioned, it's indeed on our agenda something which would allow us to pull the minds together and see, after 2 years of incipient implementation of the two agreements, how we can advance. It's not only about the short-term challenges which we are facing, but also to devise how we can better cooperate for the future. And I would say the good number of high-level officials we had from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Commerce, from various other ministries, from Seoul, always helped us to have a better understanding of the expectations of the Korean friends. I'm happy to see how many Korean friends, professors, researchers are joining us today. I'm pretty much aware that many of them are doing a good job in conducting research, cooperating with the European universities, foundations, institutes, in trying to study our experience, trying to study our way of building new institutional structures here in Europe, but also the way in which we can make good profit of this for the sake of advancing our bilateral cooperation. I would say that from the morning session and basically out of the agenda which was devised for the panels, for all the panels in the workshop, I see the excellent choice of symbolically very meaningful areas which would focus our attention for the years to come. Security. All the speakers in this panel have mentioned how much still the areas it's challenged by the new developments in security. You've noticed for sure the way in which appropriately, in a very firm, determined manner, we reacted to the way in which North Korea has conducted a number of tests which are showing that its behavior continues to be a very serious threat and challenge not only for the peninsula and Northeast Asia, but for the world in general, including a threat to the non-proliferation regime. Again, another priority in which we can share hands, join hands and share our expertise and our interests. It's the green growth, and very much the way in which the new administration, the president-elect and the amendments and the way in which the studies this day are showing that there is a good effort in trying to devise what are the priorities following the commitments she made in the electoral campaign, what would be the agenda of the new administration, how we can engage in this respect. It's giving us hope that these areas for the green growth and also for other important areas like energy might be also on the agenda for the years to come. I recall how much during March last year, when we attended the European representatives, including the two high-level top political leaders, President Van Rompuy and President Barroso attended the nuclear summit in Seoul, followed by the bilateral EU-Korea summit. These issues were on the agenda, and it was a very successful outcome of the discussions devising good cooperation for the future. Then again, we look forward to cooperate with the new administration in Seoul on these areas, hoping that we, the public servants in various departments, would be able to implement what would be designated as priorities for these agendas. Again, the multilateral cooperation and the good points made by my fellow panelists in their interventions, that the region still is suffering because of the institutional anemia all across East Asia, in spite of being heavily challenged by the security developments, persistence of certain threats, emerging competitive nationalisms in the region. Unfortunately, in spite of good attempts and a good deal of efforts made by the countries in the region, to try to shape up multilateral structures, mechanisms for handling the disputes, the threats. Still, unfortunately, these remain an open chapter of Asian history for the time being. From this point of view, I feel that always with the Korean colleagues in many forums we attended together, from the ASEAN Regional Forum's ministerial meeting to the summit of the ASEM last year in November, we always had opportunities to exchange views, to coordinate our positions, and trying to work together in contributing constructively and actively to promote the regional building of proper multilateral structures. From this point of view, once again, I believe indeed Korea is one of the leading actors for being very much aware how much, not only up northeast, there are challenges inherited from the history, from the past, but also because the whole East Asia is facing common challenges. Sometimes the people may feel that there are structures like six-party talks covering only Korean Peninsula, but actually it's about issues of global relevance, not only regional, but also global relevance. Again, while ASEAN plays a central role in promoting new forums from the ASEAN Regional Forum to East Asia Summit, these, while led mostly by countries from Southeast Asia, they also aim at covering the whole set of issues which are challenging all the countries from south to north of Asia. Once again, in this respect, I feel that the years to come would offer us new potential for a closer cooperation with Republic of Korea, and we really hope, for example, as you may know, after acceding to the Treaty of Amity and Cooperation in Southeast Asia, to be able, with the support of our Korean friends and other partners in the region, to accede to East Asia Summit, a new forum in which I'm sure our experience in building more efficient multilateral structures to handle the challenges inherited from the past, the challenges of devising proper structures to assure the management of natural resources, management of the interstate relations in the region, may also be a new contribution from the EU for the region. Let me say that I'm, in this respect, very much aware that diplomacy, as we are trying to sometime to use diplomacy as a sort of a device of last resort, represents in the way in which we are working with our colleagues from the Korean diplomatic service, something which makes us feeling that we are in a noble service. I'm not disregarding the way in which we are working with the academic and scientific communities, the contribution which is on a daily basis made with knowledge, expertise, very much competence by the business community. But also I would not forget to mention how proud I was having the chance in my years of service in Korea to meet personally Mr. Ban Ki-moon, now Secretary General of the United Nations, and to see how much with his Korean diplomatic background he was able to contribute in a very efficient manner in improving the way in which United Nations is working, and how much also we benefited of the Korean support in trying to get our new status as observer at the United Nations. Once again, I'm proud to have this past of good cooperation with the Korean diplomats, with the colleagues in diplomatic service, and I'm sure that from now on, with your support and learning more from various constituencies for this friendship we are trying now to expand and cooperate in a better way, would ensure us better prospects for the future of our relationship. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ambassador, for not only pointing us to a number of very important issues that, from the viewpoint also of the EAS, remain on the table for the future security, green growth, multilateral engagement, and also for reminding us that, in fact, the Koreans are ruling the world, pointing to Ban Ki-moon. So it's very good to know that they are also at that level very prominent. So it's now high time. I'm grateful to our panel, of course, not just for their very valuable insights and perspectives, but also for keeping so well to the time, because we have exactly half an hour for discussion and for engaging you, the audience. So may I kindly invite you to say briefly, take the floor, say who you are, and make your point so that we can collect a couple of interventions and bring them back to the panel. There you go.
Thank you very much indeed. My name is Justin Davies. I'm a member of the governing board of ISIS Europe. First of all, may I thank all of the speakers today on behalf of ISIS for their contributions, and thank everybody else for attending. ISIS has been delighted to have been a part of this innovative project over the last 2 years. And we would very much look forward as an independent organization to remaining engaged in this sort of area and to undertake studies and to take such important work further. And I'd very much be interested to hear from the panelists how they think that independent organizations can be stakeholders in what is, you have said yourselves, is a very important future both for the EU and Korea. Thank you.
Thank you. If that is fine with you, any other? Don't tell us that all questions have already been answered during today. Apparently there is such... There you go.
Thank you. My name is Angela O'Donoghue. I'm with the Irish Permanent Representation, but I'm actually here because I will be assigned to Korea come this summer as the Irish Ambassador. And with that in mind, I'd be interested in hearing reflections from the panel on the role that member states can play in supporting and working both, with the EAS and with the Korean government in developing this strategic partnership, and whether there are times when there are tensions between the bilateral relationships that some member states may have and their priorities and the broader EU relationship. Thank you.
Thank you. I look around. I'm going to ask myself a third question, and now we come to the panel. And it's basically the following point. There is, under Article 8 of the Framework Agreement between the EU and Korea, the cooperation and exchange of views between the two partners in, with regard to multilateral organizations. And it has been touched upon by our panelists. And what I'm really wondering is what the viewpoints are, I would say, both from academia, from the European Parliament, but also from the Korean and the EAS perspective with regard to the real, say, if you wish, priorities with regard to cooperation. Regional level has already been touched upon, but I guess we could broaden that up. But especially at the global multilateral level, from, I would say, the G20 to the United Nations to the WTO. It would be very interesting to hear your views about it. We now return to the panel. May I suggest that, as they usually do, we now go in the reverse order, and we come first to Ambassador Istijoa Budura.
Thank you. I feel all the questions are covering important chapter. First, how the independent bodies, be it in business, research, academia, might be partners and important stakeholders in expanding, consolidating the relationship. I would say, first of all, according to the area of interest, first I would recommend to find partners. Here at the institutional level, and we, EAS, and also the services in the Commission, we are ready to establish direct cooperation and partnership with those who would like to get involved in various areas which are on our agenda for expanding the relations with Korean partners. Secondly, to find partners across the seas in Republic of Korea, and you'll find, I can easily remember once again my years spent as ambassador in Seoul, how many were coming to the embassy to look for partners in Europe. In my country, I established 2 honorary consulates with partners in industries, in industrial communities in Busan and in Suwon and in Incheon. I opened 2 honorary consulates, in spite, once again, of my country at that time having only 10 years of diplomatic relations with Republic of Korea. But I was delighted to see how much this relationship was accelerating, giving the mutual interest for establishing links in various institutions. I recall that in 10 years we established very solid education in Romanian language in many universities. There were 160 Korean students studying my language, and you can imagine easily, Romanian language is not that widely circulating like many other languages in the world, but we had 160 in one university, University of Foreign Studies in Seoul, in 40 students in 1 year, then a 4-year system, university graduates, and that was every year, 160 people. Then look for partners in the area of your expertise, and you'll find so many. I recall the very strong association of small and medium-sized enterprises in Seoul, with thousands and thousands of members who at that time were investing abroad. 2/3 of the total amount of investments done by the Korean businesses in other countries. 2/3 coming from small and medium-sized enterprises. Then I was very much pleased to see how much there is an eagerness, an appetite to develop the links with European partners. And I will strongly recommend you to get involved in that, regardless the way in which you see things which sometimes may feel, being too far away for Korean friends and not immediately linked to their specific interest. I assure you that I encountered over there very open-minded partners with excellent expertise in many ways, including on regional issues, in which I tried at that time to learn more about the way in which Northeast Asia, Asian affairs in general, were becoming of a certain regional and global relevance. Secondly, on the support we may get in our dialogue and cooperation from the member states. And I would say that in spite of, at that time, not having so many member states represented on the ground, but I really have to wish you good luck in becoming head of the Irish mission in Seoul. And I will assure you that you'll have excellent opportunities to work with many stakeholders in Korea. The member states, again, as it was the case for me working for my country, can do a lot in developing direct links with various constituencies we have in building our friendship and cooperation and nurturing our real strategic partnership with Korean partners. From what I've mentioned, universities, foundations, research institutions, to the structures of the government. Then on bilateral basis, you really can do a lot, because the bilateral agreements we reach, the framework agreement, the FTA, are just representing the framework, the platform on which we expect member states to develop their own set of bilateral exchanges. Lastly, for the multilateral organizations, I would say that indeed Korea, as I have seen in my years over there, it's very eager to contribute, play a role in building up relevant multilateral structures in the region and contribute to the ones existing in the international community. I recall how successful has been at that time, in early 2000, the ASEM Summit hosted in Seoul, and also the last international event I've seen, it was the World Soccer Cup hosted in Korea. Again, very successful. Then from this point of view, I've always seen that our Korean friends are indeed internationally minded. Thank you.
Thank you. Ambassador Kim?
Well, first of all, to Ambassador O'Donoghue, congratulations on your new journey to assume a new duty as the head of the mission in Korea. And I can agree with more of what my good friend Viorel has just mentioned as far as these priorities and coordination and consultation mechanism that you could enjoy with both the EU delegation and also other peer member states and also the Korean counterparts. And as for Mr. Justin Davis' question, I think it's we are now seeing more actors and more players on the stage, whether it's a regional or global or localized scene. So we do welcome more players to be on the stage and more visibility of the stakeholders in the policy formulation, policy implementation, and also the feedback with the stakeholders and civil societies. And as to Jan's question about the implementation of so-called the regional and international organizations activities within the framework of the framework agreement, as Viorel has rightly pointed out, that EU and Korea are regarding each other as a valuable, capable, and like-minded partner. So on the global challenges, we are more or less sharing same values and objectives, and sometimes we are coordinating to come up with joint initiatives and joint front on the key critical global issues. So we are doing excellent jobs in coordinating with each other at the G20 throughout the whole process, and ASEM, WTO, ARF, and also on specific separate issues like human rights, development cooperation, non-proliferation. We do have a very regular policy consultation mechanisms on the operation. So I think that will be sufficient to answer your questions.
Thank you so much. And now we turn to the European Parliament. Mr. Royal.
I think I'm not a member of administration, therefore, for me, my answer is very easy. I think if we want to have real good relationship between Europe and Korea, then it's important that we have many different persons and companies and institutions which work together in this relationship. And therefore, I think it's very important that independent bodies are on play with this. It's not a job only for the administration and not a job only for the politician. Then that's not enough. That will be no success by this action. And therefore, I think it's very, very important that we have different independent bodies, industry, scientifics, and so on, which work together. And that's the same answer for me for the question of what's going on with the member states. I think European actions is one side, but it's not enough. That will only be successful when we also have the idea that many of the member states are on board and help us. And I think that's very different in European situation. Some members are very engaged in Korean relations, others less. But I think that's perhaps this relationship with Europe and Korea is also a chance for these member states which are still not so engaged in this. And the last question, it's clear. If we want to have an influence in the big global problems, then it's necessary to work together and to have a look that the Korean and the European actions and the influence will be more important than if we do it together.
Thank you so much. Le dernier mot, the last word, as it should be, is with academia. Professor Godemont.
Unlike the Pope, you know. And even the Pope these days doesn't claim the last word. So, I'll answer two of the questions. The one on the role of member states vis-à-vis the EU, and I speak as a historian. If I think the recognition by member states at the beginning of this century was botched up, it was precisely because it was not well coordinated at the time among the bigger member states. And I speak as a citizen of the country that's probably most responsible for that lack of coordination at the time. I was there, so I can still remember. Any initiative that we do towards the north has to appear as something that's been thought through, not the result of haphazard, of competition or competing philosophies. That alone is an argument for strong coordination, whether it is EAS, whether it is also intergovernmental cooperation, I don't know, but that is clear if Europe is to be effective in any policy attempts. The second question about global, what could be the objects of global cooperation beyond the regional goals and institutional building and multilateral rule that we've been talking about. I think there are a number of topics to expand on what I said. The Korean Peninsula now is the target, so to speak, of an incredible degree of pollution, particles and dust that come from the Chinese industrial and urban inferno of today, just like Japan. It is a very strong argument for international cooperation and new norms and helping to fund these new norms, because realistically the situation is not going to change without some sort of Marshall Plan or some sort of cooperative action. This is a goal that interests us Europeans as well. If we look at the issue of nuclear safety, nuclear safety is something, I think there is a very good paper in this series that demonstrates that nuclear safety is still perhaps too much the responsibility of each member state. In fact, the ROK is now a considerable competitor and a considerable builder of civilian nuclear plants. There is a question of norms there. There is a question of generations. I speak again as a citizen of a country that is also a competitor and also builds nuclear plants. And I think when we look at this situation, at the coming Chinese producer, we need norms, we need agreement, we need a bit more than competition. I think it's an excellent area where, Korea is both strong and needs to chip in. I could go on and on, but I think these are all novel areas. I want, if you allow me, to answer briefly a question that was not asked, but merely because, but merely because Ambassador Kim Chang-beom quite rightly pointed us back to the goal of reunification, where in the words that I spoke, I was hinting, and I was not hinting, I was mentioning the need for guaranteeing the North Korean state that seems to be a contradiction. I don't think it is. Unfortunately, this is not the situation of the reunification of Germany, where East Germany started crumbling after its Soviet patron began shaking. They have achieved proof that they can survive the disappearance of patrons. And even China, they have a materialistic and opportunistic relationship, but not a true relationship of strategic protection. And therefore, I think if we are to move ahead, we have to have this recognition factor. We have to have more exchanges between the North and the South, whatever the situation is in the North, whatever the nuclear regime happens to be. I think this society and this human group of leaders, which is dynastic and closely tied together by a number of interest, would only begin to crumble when there is a way out, when there is an exit, and that requires guarantees. That requires a legal regime, and that's why I just want to reassure Ambassador Kim that I'm not advocating a division for eternity of the Korean Peninsula, but merely try to outline a way out of the present situation. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm looking around. There is still one. Well, then we'll give that opportunity.
Thank you very much, Professor. My question is kind of specific. It is more directed to the two distinguished representatives of the EU and Korean diplomatic services. It relates to a very important topic at the moment, which is the one of the rule of law in post-conflict situations, but also the topic of the international rule of law. So as we all know, I mean, the rule of law is one of the founding principles of the EU, but also of its external relations. And very recently, there was a very important high-level meeting at the UN level back in September 2012, meeting during which, I mean, the Republic of Korea made a very interesting voluntary pledge in which it emphasized, I mean, the importance of international tribunals ranging from the ICC to the ICJ to the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea, while at the same time, I mean, emphasizing the need not to instrumentalize the rule of law as a way to intervene in the affairs of third states without any good reasons. And my question would be the following. I mean, to what extent can the EU and the Republic of Korea collaborate in this important field of international affairs and of international law more particularly? And I would say to what extent both actors can participate to norms diffusion, to the diffusion of the key principles of the rule of law in Asia, and more particularly in countries like China, which are really interested in the concept, but who advocate, I mean, the existence of a so-called system of rule of law with Chinese characteristics. And to the same extent, I mean, to what extent can the EU and the Republic of Korea collaborate to settle important, significant territorial disputes in Asia on the basis of some rule of law principles? And here I'm more particularly talking about disputes between the PRC and China, for instance, on the Senkaku and Diaoyu Islands. Thank you.
Well, thank you. I'm sure this response must be very useful for your PhD research. So I now give the floor, maybe first, Ambassador Kim.
That was mean.
Well, thank you so much. It's quite a tricky question. It's highly sensitive to some of the stakeholders that awarding a great importance of the whole current dealings surrounding this specific issue. I think EU is very strong and well regarded as a normative power in the international community and international law in general, and the setting up the value system in the general order of the international relations, and also promoting and diffusing, as we have said, the kind of the power of value and principled normative settings within the international order has been more or less one of the achievements that have been made by the European Union and the most of the European Union member states. So I think Korea is a bit a late learner and late starter in implementing and putting into force the kind of the internationalized norm and legalized basis into the whole diplomatic setting. But I'm sure that Korea can work together in a more kind of coordinated manner with the European Union. And for the specific question that you have raised vis-a-vis small rocky islets, I think I'm better not to mention any words on that specific issue.
Thank you. It's a good question and maybe deserves to try to host another workshop on that. Well, but consider that we just start to contribute. Yeah, it's the first improvised panel. Then we really look forward to be invited to join you next time when Dr. Wouters will chair the panel for covering these issues. Frankly, with China, we in the human rights dialogue with China, we had even last year when we discussed with them, we are exploring the possibility, as already done by some member states, Germany for example, to have a separate dialogue on rule of law. in China. That's something which, once again, we are exploring, and we know how much the Chinese are very eager to learn from the EU's and the member states' experience in this respect, in spite of the appearances. And that's part, let me say that clearly, it's part of their efforts to keep pursuing reforms, and I'm sure the new leadership will be very eager to show that in the future, maybe at the future National People's Congress session in the spring, but also in the way in which they will continue in trying to learn from the European experience, including in our bilateral dialogues, EU institutions, or with the member states. Secondly, the way in which we formulated our position. Please check on the East Asia policy guidelines, which is on the European EAS website. And you'll see how much there, the principle of the rule of law is there and present in the positions we are mentioning in many respects, including in the way in which we invite the parties involved in these claims and disputes to try to do and settle the issues, handle and settle the issues in the spirit of the international rule. Thirdly, with Korea, I would say we have a very strong partner in this respect, in the way in which, once again, we cooperate in the international forums and also in the regional forums in Asia. Fourthly, I would recall that this principle also is mentioned in the program we agreed last year at the ministerial meeting with the ASEAN 10 nations, the ministerial meeting which took place in Brunei, and we agreed a plan of action in which the EU institutions are trying to help 10 Asian nations, Southeast Asia, and the process of integration in ASEAN in respecting, promoting, implementing this principle of rule of law under the given circumstances and facing the challenges specifically they have to handle in the region. Then from this point of view, I would say at least EAS, our service, as part of the whole structure of the set of institutions of the European Union, but also not only us, but in cooperation with the European Parliament, with the Council, with the Member States, we are trying in our daily agenda, in our interactions with partners, starting with like-minded, credible, legitimate partners, as Ambassador said, with Republic of Korea, but with many other stakeholders for the regional peace, stability and progress in East Asia, to pursue this as core value of our agenda. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Isicao Budura. Ladies and gentlemen, excellencies, colleagues, friends, we have come to the end of a very long and fruitful day with EU-Korea public diplomacy program. The European Union aimed to stipulate a dialogue between the EU and Korea, and the projects that were presented here today aim to contribute to this end, and the active attendance of many participants here today shows that there is indeed a strong interest. I would really like to sincerely thank the distinguished panel members for their very interesting and thoughtful contributions. Thank you as an audience for your contribution to all of the discussions today. And I really would also like to thank all of our very dedicated staff of our institutions, of the EU-Korea Institute at Vrije Universiteit Brussel, of ISIS Europe, of Leuven Center for Global Governance, and the EU institutions here for their excellent work. It's now, last but not least, my pleasure to remind you that we are all, because you're all registered for this conference, but also for what is going to happen now, that we are all now basically expected to participate in the reception that will be co-hosted by the Ambassador and the European External Action Service to celebrate the opening event for the 50th anniversary of the EU-Korea relations. This is at a different venue at the Berlaymont Building, European Commission, and I propose we walk together there while there is some light snow falling on our heads. La session est levée.